Welcome to the Women of Ihsan podcast. I'm your host, Sofia, and this is an invitation to join me and our amazing guests to find inspiration and insights into your own journey to Ihsan. If you ever feel overwhelmed or confused along the way, I'm also here to support you so you can tackle your challenges with confidence and make progress towards this lofty goal. To find out more about my work, check the episode description and make sure to subscribe.
والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Bismillah wa salat wa salam ala Rasulillah. Welcome to a new episode of the Women of Ihsan podcast. Today, joining me from London, Aysha Mercedes. Aysha is an Islam channel presenter and founder and host of the popular podcast Sister to Sister. Professionally, Aysha is a counselor and she specializes in trauma with an interest in childhood emotional neglect and how this impacts on self-worth and authenticity. I'm super excited to have Aysha today, and thank you so much for making the time in your busy schedule.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm delighted to be here. We've already had half a podcast before we actually got started, so I'm sure this is going to be a great conversation, inshallah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So let's get into it. Tell us about yourself, your personal story.
So my personal story. So where do I start? It's so layered. But I grew up in London. So I actually live outside London at the moment. So I know that you're based in Germany, but I'm kind of in the suburbs. So I'm outside of the city. So I grew up in London. I am mixed race. So my dad, may Allah have mercy on him, was Jamaican, and my mum is English Irish. So a bit of a mix. So mum and dad met in the 80s, and they had me. And then what had happened is dad was in and out of prison. So my dad, when I first met my dad, when I was a baby, he was in prison. So there was that experience. And then on top of that, and the reason why I'm speaking about this first is because this has had a massive impact on my life. So mum then started to realize that dad isn't 100% mentally well.
Mm-hmm.
And later went on to kind of find out that she wasn't told that he had been sectioned under the Mental Health Act because he was paranoid schizophrenic. So this all happened after I was born.
Mm-hmm. So
you can imagine it was a very unstable start to my life. Mm-hmm. So that's why I started where I did, because your childhood, and this is why I talk about childhood emotional neglect, and what we'd call the kind of mother wound and father wound, because your childhood and how you're brought up has a major impact on then how you go on to live the rest of your life. And people may say, oh, not in all cases, but it definitely plays an impact. So after that period of time, we ended up moving away to different parts of London to kind of escape my dad. And it was more because he would have like a psychotic episode. And I don't know if you've ever been into contact with somebody that has a psychotic episode. No. It's very scary.
Mm-hmm. Can imagine.
Yeah, it's very, very scary. So there was that was kind of where my life started, in a bit of instability. However, on the other hand, my mum's family and my dad's family, to be quite honest, they were really nice people, really decent people. So in between all of that, I actually did have a lot of fun. My mum took us out. We went to sort of every theme park, every farm, every kind of like zoo across the country, which was a lot of fun. We were always out riding bikes, always always active. So it wasn't all bad. But then again, we moved a couple of times, ended up moving over to Essex because my dad had another episode. And that was a big move, because moving from the city of London, where it's very diverse, where it's very, overpopulated, and there's a lot going on. It's like London, they say, is the city that never sleeps. Essex is not that city. That place is totally different. Like, and alhamdulillah, I'm here now, and I appreciate it a lot more now. As an adult, but as a child, it was quite daunting to kind of be in an area where there's very little going on. I was the only brown person really in the area at the time, and then when I started school, I was the only brown person in the school, female one. There was a boy that was older in another year, and he was actually on television, so he was actually famous. So, and because of that, he was popular anyway. But yeah, I was, going into school then was a very unique experience, because I'd gone from being, in a diverse school with people that looked like me to, looking around and seeing every other girl that was there with straight blonde or brown hair. And, there was me with, curly hair, and and people will say, well, I'm a very light-skinned person. My skin is extremely light, which I take more after my mum. But this is the kind of misunderstanding that just because you're light doesn't mean to say you're white. And that can even go for people that are from different countries that also have white skinned. You could be Arab, you could be from Eastern Europe, but it doesn't mean to say that you're white. And when you're different, when you're the other, you feel like the other, and you feel very much like left out. So as I grew into sort of, because it was about 11 then, as I grew into sort of teenage ages, I had a bit of an identity crisis. I didn't know I was having an identity crisis, but I got to a point where I really wanted to be white, because ultimately I didn't have much connection with my Jamaican side of the family, my black side of the family. And I guess I was a little bit resentful that I upped and left my whole life in London because of my dad. And then I was the only one out, the odd one out. And when you go into being a teenager, you know what it's like. You want to fit in.
Yeah.
You don't want to stand out. And I wouldn't say, I mean, I did experience some racism, but it was more that I felt different, and I knew I was different by some of the things that friends would say. Like, I had twin friends, twin girls, and they would say, we're not allowed to bring a black boy home. Our parents have said we cannot bring a black boy home. Then there'd be other instances where people would say, oh, I'm going to tell a joke. Is it all right with you? So even though it may not be directly, or it may not have been, or it wasn't directly racism, it certainly made me feel very much like I was not a part of, them. And I wasn't. I had a different accent as well. So now when I speak to people, they can hear that I'm from Essex. But back then, I had a London accent, which is very different. So that was kind of made fun of. you know, like it was kind of made fun of slightly. So then I became defensive. So my defense mechanism was, okay, so how am I going to kind of protect myself?
Mm-hmm.
So I was already somebody that was usually fighting anyway from sort of the ages of primary school, because I was moving around so much, and I guess I just fell into, and I guess I was quite angry, so I guess I fell into that role. So yeah, so I kind of like decided, I think, when I went into that school, that I'm going to make sure I defend myself, and if that meant that I would be violent and I would fight, then that's what I felt that I had to do. So that's what happened. So that got me into like various different issues, and then it got to a point where I'm not sure why, I can't actually remember what had happened, but somebody had told me that a girl that I kind of used to be friends with, I think we'd fallen out,
Mm-hmm.
but that she'd called me the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there was some racist comments being made, and my reaction to that was, okay, no problem. And of course, as I said, you know, fighting and violence was something that I'd adopted. And so I went and found her, and, you know, I went for her. And then as a result of that, I got expelled from school.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no consideration taken. And I mean, obviously, when you are violent, and when you do, you know, effectively put your hands on someone in a school setting, it's always going to be you that comes out worse.
Yeah.
But there was no consideration taken to the fact that, you know, me being, I think there was a few more people at this point, I was about 15, in the school that were, you know, of colour. But again, not many. But it wasn't taken into consideration, and it wasn't even raised. It was just, okay, this is what happened, and you're now being expelled from the school.
Yeah.
So that was, I mean, that wasn't ideal, because then I went on to go to sort of like a pupil referral unit. So then that is where you're with all the naughty kids in a naughty school, and you're pretty much around people like-minded, you know, that are really naughty, and then you just end up being even more naughty. It's not, if you hear about these things now, they're even worse than then. Then there wasn't a big deal of people, and especially not in Essex either. So I don't think that really helped to where I then ended up, because I think one thing leads to another. If you put a child in those sort of influential years around other children that are, you know, have also been expelled, who are also quote unquote naughty, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Because you're just going to influence each other, and then it becomes about, oh, who's going to be naughtier, and you're almost kind of pushing each other to
The vicious circle.
Yes, exactly. So then I got moved out of one unit into another, where I was pretty much getting picked up in a taxi and being taken to this school in a house miles away in another part of Essex where I live. So yeah, I don't think that was the best move, but that was the decision that was made for me. So I kind of just scraped through a few GCSEs, English, maths and science, the basics, and then things weren't good at home with my mum. So my mum, as a consequence of splitting up with my dad, she didn't really recover from that. So she had relationships. I've got a little brother, but she just never seemed to commit in those relationships. And it's clear to me now that she never really got over my dad. And it was a very difficult experience for her, because she didn't know that my dad was unwell, and she loved him, you know, she had a child with him, and then things just went from bad to worse. So she never really got over him, and she came from quite a stable upbringing, and I think because of that, it just was worse for her, because she just didn't have any preparation how to manage that. And then she was pretty much emotionally absent, because, you know, again, when we look at single parents are women, single parents, they, you know, it's their life is based around surviving, right? Going to work, paying the bills, looking after the kids. So they're in what we hear it a lot, the masculine energy.
Yeah.
And you know, not all of the time, but a lot of the time, because there's so much of that energy that goes into survival, it means that it can and I felt it myself before, because even like when my mum broke her arm and I was taking her to the hospital, and I just got into this like mode. And, you know, alhamdulillah, I'm very self-aware from all the training that I've done. And I kind of like was almost looking at myself as myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, my mum was kind of trying to talk to me and like making jokes and stuff, which she always does. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, right, we've got to get her to the hospital. You know, I got into like a bit of a focus on, let's just get here, and the human side of me kind of left at that point. And the reason why I connect that to this is because I think that's what happens. Your focus is on, okay, I've got to get the bills paid, I've got to get the money in, I've got to get everything tidy, I've got to get the kids to school, when you get into that mode, it can take you out of the feminine, or it can take you out of the emotional, right, which are all those, you know, feminine traits. You know, the nurturing, for example, it takes you out of that, because you're focusing on, okay, all the list of things need to get done now. So I get that, but you know, in that, what happens is that the child, me, is not getting their emotional needs met, doesn't feel seen, doesn't feel heard, isn't getting supported. You know, yes, needs are being met, you know, physical, you know, the kind of safety needs. You've got a home, you've got a roof over your head, but the focus is more around that than around, are you okay?
Emotions.
Yeah. Are you okay? How are you coping? Do you need anything?
Yeah.
It's, you know, and my mum suffered,
which we also need. We need this emotional nurturing.
Yeah, exactly. And my mum also suffers with depression as well. So, you know, that's then being depressed and on top of being out of your nurturing state, your feminine state. So I was being sent to a school right out in deep Essex in a taxi by myself every, you know, couple of times a week. And then I'd be coming home. Mum would be in her room, I would be in my room. So I've lost now the social aspect of school, friends. And when I come home, Mum is in her room. I think she was doing some work from home as well. And so I just come in and I just sit by myself. So it got to a point where I was just like, I mean, it wasn't conscious, but I then, when you're looking for something, you're going to find it, but it's not necessarily that it's good for you. So I was looking for, I guess, family. And where I found the family was where all of the other people that come from, I don't like the term broken homes, but ultimately, it's, a broken home, a home that isn't necessarily healthy, that you haven't necessarily got present parents. So I found myself looking for family in the wrong places, which was on the streets, outside with the kids, with other kids that are from broken homes. So yeah, from about 15, that's where I started to spend my time with my adopted family members on the streets. So we pretty much just hung out, and there'd be people's houses that we would go to that were maybe a little bit older, and everybody from those homes would end up in these same sort of places. And then you just one set of people leads to another, and then you end up in different areas. Well, I ended up, and it's the same for a lot of people. You end up in one area and then another area, and then before you know it, you've got lots of different extended family members in the form of children from broken homes. But that then leads to, again, it's that cycle, because I wouldn't even call it a cycle. I would say it's, every situation then leads to another situation, and then there's no intervention. Nothing's going to break that spiral. I think is probably the best word, because you go from school, then you end up with another set of people, then another set of people, and you're just getting deeper and deeper into self-destruction.
But alhamdulillah, I mean, so I'm going to use that because, okay, the spiral or the circle, you broke it at some point. So how did that happen? So along those, fast forward a few years, you also became Muslim. So is it, does one have to do with the other? Tell us more about how you bounced back. I mean, it feels like I'm listening to you. It sounds like you were in this hole and digging this hole, because like you said, every bad situation, you get to a worse situation. So you're digging this hole even deeper and deeper. How did you get out of that? And where you are now, subhanallah, mashallah, I mean, someone just like me before that, looking at your Instagram, at your stories and your career, mashallah, you would have no idea that you came from this very dark background.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a good question, because I never really thought that my story, when I started telling it, it was kind of by accident. So I didn't really ever look at it how, when I always get the feedback of, oh, how did you get from that sort of place to there? Because when you are on your own journey, for you it's just kind of almost like, oh, I just got there. But then when somebody asks you, it's like, actually, it's a good question, because being in that sort of space, and almost like you kind of, that analogy of it being almost like going deeper and deeper into this dark hole, before you know it, you're at the, you're in a deep, dark place. And, you look up and it's like, how am I going to get out of that? So it's a really good question. And I think before I became Muslim, I think it can get to a point, and it did get to a point, where I don't think I could have got into a darker space. And so, that saying that when you hit rock bottom, the only way is up.
Exactly.
That I think is where I got to. And like I'd never had a job. I'd never really, I mean, I'd had a paper round, but I guess I didn't consider myself worthy, because I just didn't see. And I think that also is, you know, I was quite young, you know, it's carried on to about 18. I didn't have any life skills really. I didn't necessarily consider myself worthy. And then I think it just got to a point where I started doing a few education courses, just little things here and there. And then I was in a pretty dark space. And I think because of that, I just made a decision after some time that this isn't a space that I want to go back to. And so that was the start of the motivation. Like, I just don't want to be here anymore. And that wasn't I mean, it sounds like, oh, I just decided that that's not what I want. That, you know, it took me many years to then get out of that space. And I think, you know, like we were speaking about resilience earlier on, and I think when you have had so many things kind of hit you, and it's almost like you're being hit from left to right, from top to bottom, you get used to being hit, and you get used to just kind of batting things away. So I feel like even though it was, you know, a very dark point, and it, you know, it just, there were so many things that I kind of within that spiral that I got into. But again, that resilience of having those things happen and then still being able to come back from them then allowed me to recognize, okay, I want to move forward. And it wasn't easy, because you go to a job interview and you've got no experience because you've never worked. So you get knocked back. But because, as I said, I'd been knocked so many times in different ways, I'm like, well, no worries, I'll just try again. And that was just what it was. It was like, okay, the first thing is just get yourself a job. And I was working and knocking on people's doors, doing door-to-door sales, you know, spending 8 hours going round and knocking and, you know, trying to get people to sign up for charities, working in, you know, commission-based call centers. So I just pretty much started off just doing anything that I could get into to get some experience. And after time of doing that, you know, then I started getting the experience, then I started getting the confidence, then I started to kind of, I guess in some respects, know my worth. So this is, you know, I'm in my sort of earliest 20s, and I'm still trying to find myself, because usually people go through those stages earlier on, but, you know, because of where I was, I didn't get to that. So it was kind of almost like a later point of me trying to find out who I am. And I mean, working isn't the only way, but it certainly does help you, because then you're around people that are a bit more stable. Now I'm not street kids anymore. Now I'm around people that are working. Now I'm around professionals. So I'm learning those life skills as I go along.
And having responsibilities as well.
To some extent, yeah, to some extent. I think, well, I went to live with my dad, and my dad pretty much looked after me a lot. But what happened then was, my dad, because I was living with my dad, then I moved out of my dad's and went back to my mum's. But then the reason why I'm connecting this is because my dad, I was in contact with him because, again, it was very up and down because of his mental health. And I got a phone call, and somebody has said to me, look, you need to go down to your dad's flat. So I was kind of like, oh, you know, what is this going to be to do with? When I got down there, wasn't expecting to hear, and I speak about this quite a bit, that somebody had attacked him with a knife, and he had been stabbed multiple times. So that was actually what led me to becoming Muslim.
SubhanAllah.
So when I went down, police had said, okay, he's at the hospital, went to the hospital. He'd been stabbed, legs, arms, and in his heart. He looks okay, he seemed okay, but the doctor switched over at 12 o'clock when they do their handover, and they said, has anyone checked his heart? And they said, no, he's okay, we've just kind of checked over. And they was like, but he's been stabbed in the heart, you need to check for internal bleeding. They checked for internal bleeding, and there was internal bleeding, and if they had have left it, he would have died, because he would have internally bled to death.
Mm-hmm.
So they operated on him straight away. But I had gone home from the hospital, and at that time I had been given a Quran, and I'd also kind of started to speak to some of my friends about Islam, but it was just the beginning stages. But when I'd gone home, I was obviously really upset, because just seeing my dad, he could have died, he may have died, and I wasn't even in contact with him. So I've gone home, got in my room, and I've seen the Quran was kind of sitting across the other side of the room. So I've picked up the Quran, I've opened it, and I'm trying to make sense of it. It's in English, but I wasn't somebody that was religious. I didn't know anything about, I just said I was on the streets, was completely lost. So I'm opening a religious book. I think I'd opened the Bible and not made any sense of that before as well. And I'm trying to kind of make sense of it and trying to understand it. The person that had given me, it was like an older uncle that had given me the Quran, had said, ask Allah for anything, and Allah says be, and it will be. So I'm trying to kind of find answers, trying to look through the Quran. It's not making sense. I've gone and sat on my bed, and I'm really crying hysterically in a really bad way. And I just kind of reached out to God, and I was like, oh Allah, take the pain away. And I felt like a warm feeling come into my feet, all the way up my legs, all the way through my body, and felt like a lift in my heart. And I just felt like a warmth in my body, and I stopped crying. And it was almost as though things just took a shift, things just didn't feel so bad anymore. And I felt like at that point I'd been guided to Islam, Allah had just showed me a sign, this is from me. So yeah, it was after that I was I need to take my Shahada, I need to become Muslim, because the feeling that I felt could only have come from Allah. There's no other explanation for it. And it just, for me, it just took the edge off. It just took away, it didn't cancel out my feelings, but it just took a slight edge off of how I was feeling. And I just couldn't believe the way that I was crying hysterically, and then I just stopped crying. Like Allah had just said, I've got you. And yeah, I think it was a few weeks later, but I was ready to take my Shahada then. That was my confirmation. So it kind of all links in to my dad. And this is why I always say Allah will find you.
SubhanAllah.
Wherever you are, Allah will find you, and he will guide you in the way that you need to be guided. Imagine, from the start of my life, every part of my life somehow connected to the relationship that I had with my father, and how unstable my life was. But then ultimately to not even be in contact with him, to then finding out that he's been stabbed, to then that being the reason that I turned to Allah in that moment, and then becoming Muslim, subhanallah.
Yeah, subhanallah. It's so beautiful how Allah can guide whomever he wills, however far we think someone might be. But because it's closer to us than our jugular vein, it can happen in just the blink of an eye. Subhanallah. And we've seen that in the past weeks, all of these non-Muslims going to the Quran and being guided, subhanallah. But also I feel like the person is also looking for Allah, because we have this inside of us, inside of our heart. We have a special place which is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and who's yearning to have this relationship with him. And when we get to explore this space and feeling this void, and we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is in the moment where we are ready to receive the light.
Yeah.
Subhanallah. These stories are just unique, amazing, and so beautiful. And I think they're also all of these stories, they are signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But again, however far you think you might be, it can change in the blink of an eye, subhanallah.
Actually.
I want, because it's called Women of Ihsan, obviously, I want to ask you, what does it mean for you personally to strive and become excellent every day?
I looked at this question before and I was thinking, it's such a beautiful question, but there's so many ways I could look at it.
Let's pick one.
Well, and this is what I was saying. There's so many ways to look at, and also I felt like, even hearing, a woman of excellence, like to even be asked that question is an honor. That it's even that Allah's honored me to guide me to Islam. Like that in itself for me just brings like a level of emotion that I can't even explain, because knowing my history, like you've known my history, I've spoken to you, even we've gone a little bit deeper outside of the conversation. I would never have imagined that Allah would have honored me to guide me to Islam, let alone to be having a conversation about being a woman of excellence or striving to be a woman of excellence. But I just feel like, for me, trying to keep sincere, like trying to keep my intentions sincerely for the sake of Allah, but also trying not to get, especially being on social media, being in the public eye, it can be difficult to keep your intentions pure. It's a test for anybody.
Of course.
And it's actually nothing really to be, I don't want to say it's nothing to be proud of, but it's not what people think it is. It's not, the honor isn't in being famous or being well known. The honor is in being able to represent yourself as a Muslim woman that is striving, that is trying her best, and that wants to please her Lord. That's where the honor is. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be on social media. And that's what I think it is. I feel like Allah's given me a responsibility that's very, very heavy. It's a big burden, and to be excellent, I don't believe that I would ever be excellent.
I think it's a moving target, but we are striving.
Yeah. But I wouldn't even feel, and it's not because I don't feel that I'm worthy. It's not because I don't love myself, or, I don't feel that I'm worthy within myself as a human being. Because alhamdulillah, knowing that Allah's given me his guidance, he found me lost and he guided me from a dark place. But to have that honor means that I need to give back. I need to try to prove to him that I deserve this honor. So that's why I when I heard the question, I was like, when I saw the question, I was like, oh, I don't want to completely be like, no, I'll never get there. But I always want to strive to just try and be sincere. And I think that that's the only thing that comes to mind. It's not even about kind of, oh yeah, I want to do this and I want to do that. And, these are the steps I'm going to take. I just want to be sincere. I just want to try to ensure that my actions are for the sake of Allah, and that I'm not doing what I'm doing, in my practice, my counseling practice, as a therapist, or on social media, that it's always sincerely for the sake of Allah, to support other women, to make myself a better Muslim, to strive to get to Jannah. Not that there's all these, oh, I'm going to do this first, then that, then this, then that.
It's already hard enough just to be sincere.
Exactly.
Because everything happens inside our heart, but we need to check on not on a daily basis, but on an hourly basis.
Hourly basis, yeah.
Who am I doing this for? It's I think it's the biggest jihad that we have, the biggest struggle to fight our nafs, and making sure, okay, I'm not doing this to please the people. I'm doing this because I know it's the thing that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not something small. Yeah, definitely. Is there a piece of advice that you would like to give to the audience?
So I haven't really spoken much about like my profession, but when I started therapy, I didn't actually realize I needed therapy myself, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
And it sounds like, when I tell my story now, it sounds like, I went through a traumatic past, and my childhood was unstable, but I didn't know that. And a lot of people don't recognize that the actions, because we're all Muslim, right? And we turned back to Allah, and we seek Allah's guidance on everything we do. But Allah also tells us in the Quran that he will not change the condition of a person until they change what's inside of themselves.
Yeah.
So we have to also have tawakkul. We can't just expect that Allah is going to just, and I mean, Allah's able to do all things, but we also need to take action, to take accountability as well. And I still had some issues. Right, within my marriage, within my own, with my mental health journey. And Allah guided me to, to start the therapy, not only to learn it, but also, it's a requirement of the course to have therapy alongside being a therapist. And had Allah not guided me, because I prayed istikhara about 10 years ago for Allah's guidance on it, I did it open-ended, for Allah's guidance on what to do with my life. Because as I said, in my 20s, just starting out trying to, door-to-door sales, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
So I was completely at a loss what I should do with my life. And it happened that Allah didn't facilitate me actually doing my counseling until I got into, he's the most wise. He knows when it's right for us to go on our journey in whichever direction we're going into. So when I actually did start the counseling and then my own personal therapy, the journey of discovery around what I had been through and how it had impacted me was something that I spent years in that space, and it's helped me a lot with my relationships with other people, my relationships with myself. I say to people now, like, I take a couple of days off. Why can't you work? Because this is what I need. I need to have peace. I need to look after myself. It's not just about self-care, it's self-maintenance.
Exactly, yeah.
And so I wouldn't have known that without going through my own personal development. And so I guess, getting to the actual answer of the question, I think it's very important that we look at ourselves, because we do spend a lot of time looking out for people, focusing on what they're doing, what they're not doing, especially online. There's just, there's a really unhealthy culture of looking outside at what everybody else is doing and sort of failing to take accountability for what we're doing or what we're not doing. And the reason why I say this is because not only does it impact us and our own mental health, but it also impacts our children. So it's important for us to recognize our own life experiences, and whether it's trauma. It doesn't always have to be trauma, but it's what we're seeing is an increase in mental health. I put some statistics out the other day. It's like 25% of adults in the UK are or have struggled with their mental health, and that is a result of generational trauma. People have suffered with trauma, from the war, from slavery, and this then, if nobody then stops to think, well, how has this impacted me, from my parents' parents and their parents, grandparents, and so on and so forth, then if I don't stop to look at the impact on me, then that impact will then go on to my children, or it will impact my relationships. It will impact my mental health. So many people struggling with anxiety, depression, and all of these things. And this then impacts on children, family members, and we have unhealthy relationships. And with unhealthy relationships, relationships are a massive part of our life.
Mm-mm.
We are creatures of, we're sociable creatures. So if we have unhealthy relationships, then that then directly impacts on us. So ultimately, my message is that we should work on ourselves. We should not just, like, again, go back to striving for excellence. Striving for excellence is trying to be the best version of yourself, trying to be the best of character, because it's not only is it, fundamental for your mental health and your relationships and on all of that, and not passing that on to our children, but it's also weighs heavy on the scales on the day of judgment. Good character.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah, sometimes when I interact with Muslims that I don't know, and outwardly, mashallah, Allah Mubarak, they look like the best of a Muslim, but then when you interact, even something as basic as the salams, it's difficult for that to even happen. And that's because we're working a lot of the time on our exterior and our fiqh, which is important, the do's and the don'ts. But what about our character?
Yeah.
So I think it ties in with our own end goal, which is Jannah, and the character weighing heavy on the scales, but also improving the quality of relationships, and then that improves the community as well of Muslims. So I would say that that's very important, and it's been life-changing for me to work on myself, to improve, and I feel healthier, I feel happier. It's improved my relationship with Allah, and you don't know what you don't know. So
Exactly.
knowing yourself and getting to know yourself better, knowing who you are,
Facing our demons.
Yeah,
mashallah. I'm sure a lot of us we can benefit from that. I also think that anyone, whatever their background, their life story, they could benefit from that, from at least one therapy session. I really think it's something, well, if you have an expert with you and someone who knows what they're doing, it can only be beneficial, mashallah. So before I let you go, I wanted to ask, is there someone that you would like to see on the podcast as a guest? And what would you ask her?
There is somebody that she's a friend of mine's brother's wife. And the reason why, like, she's not in the public eye, she's not well known, but whenever I go round to my friend's mum's house, she is like, I think we have a lack of role models that are just showing what it's like to be a feminine Muslim wife. And so I always say this to my friend whenever I see her brother's wife. She's just very patient, very easygoing. She caters to her mother-in-law, her husband. And I feel like we should see more of that online, because we see a lot of business women, entrepreneurs, trailblazers, all of these women, which is fantastic and inspiring, honestly. But I also think it's important for us to see just a general Muslim wife that's been in a marriage for a long time, that is soft, nurturing, feminine, those qualities.
Okay, you make the introduction and I can have her, no problem.
Yeah. I don't know how comfortable she would be coming on, but just to ask her about that, like, how does she remain patient? Giving out some tips on how to be nurturing, how to be a good wife. Just simple stuff, because I feel like even a lot of now born Muslims, women, like, it hasn't necessarily been taught, and it's not necessarily, and she may not have been taught, I don't know, but I find it very inspiring to see her patience with being a wife and being a mother, not with being an entrepreneur, not with being somebody in the public eye, not with being anything attached to her title that we would deem successful, but just being a wife.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's important to have these role models as well. So inshallah, if you can make the introduction and connect me to her, I'll be more than happy to have her, inshallah. Thank you so much, Aysha. Jazakallah khairan. It was amazing listening to you. Greatly beneficial to see, subhanAllah, Allah says that He will bring us from darkness into light. And I feel like your story is a perfect illustration of that. From darkness into the light from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So thank you so much for taking the time today. I will share all your social media in the description so people can reach out to you And if anyone has questions and comments, please do comment, ask questions, and I will make sure to get back to you. And I'm sure Aysha will be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you so much, Aysha.
Jazakallah khairan for having me. It's been a great conversation. May Allah continue to put barakah in everything you do.
Ameen wa iyaki. The same for you, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.